Hi everybody, this is Dr. Ari Tuckman. I'm a psychologist and ADHD expert, and I'm doing a video for Adhd magazine for ADHD Awareness Week. This year, 2011, it will be from October 16th to the 22nd, and there's going to be a bunch of good stuff going on in the world of ADHD that week. So check out adhdmag.com as well as all your other usual places for good information about ADHD this week. What I'm going to be talking about here is the myths of ADHD. In other words, all those things that are not true about ADHD, but darn it, they just kind of refuse to die and go away. So the first that I would address, and the most sort of aggravating, is this idea that ADHD is not real, that it's, kind of related to this idea is that it's a fabrication of psychiatry, it's a fabrication of the drug companies to sell pills, it's a sign of bad parenting, it's a sign of the times, whatever. It kind of comes in different shapes and sizes. But basic idea is the same, that ADHD isn't real, that somehow it's been made up. Sometimes people say, well, when I was a kid, we didn't have ADHD, which is kind of bogus because I'm 41. Frankly, I got a couple of kids from my elementary school years. I'll bet you $1,000 that they have ADHD, even if at the time nobody ever used those words. So if you think about it, there are people from your childhood that probably did have ADHD, and that, really, if they were a kid now, much more likely to be diagnosed. So, so what's our evidence? How do we know ADHD is real? Well, a lot of different ways. Genetic studies have found that there's at least half a dozen genes, and counting. In other words, we're going to be finding more, but at least half a dozen genes involved in ADHD, primarily stuff related to dopamine transport. So the neurons in our brains, they use dopamine as well as other neurotransmitters. So folks with ADHD, their genes are a little bit different, and therefore their ability to handle and process dopamine is a little bit different. So that's one line of evidence. Another line, if you take 20 people with ADHD, you take 20 people without ADHD, and you scan their brains in terms of, brain activity levels in different areas of their brain. Once again, you can clearly see a difference between those with and those without ADHD. Not that you could do brain scans to diagnose individuals, so that is not valid. But, if you do brain scans, you see differences. If you look at life outcomes and performance in different sorts of tasks, once again, you can see a difference between those who do have ADHD and those who do not have ADHD. So, very clearly the research is in. ADHD is the most, or one of the most well-researched, well-documented, well-studied areas in all of child mental health. So more than anxiety, more than depression, more than, everything else. Like, ADHD is well documented. So the people who say that it isn't, they're just not accurate. I mean, they're wrong. They just don't know the data. Still got a lot of research to be done on ADHD in adults, but we're getting there. So the research is clearly on the side that ADHD is indeed real, and if you have ADHD or someone you care about has ADHD, you don't need to read the research to know that ADHD is real. Now, a related myth here, myth number 2, is that if you're not hyperactive, then you don't have ADHD. And that, unfortunately, that's incorrect as well. That there are some people who have what's called primarily the inattentive type. So they were never hyperactive. And these folks are sometimes, it's said that they have ADD instead of ADHD. Technically, ADD is the old term, ADHD is a new term, and, it's technically ADHD inattentive type, even if ADD sounds like it makes more sense. So, but some people were never hyperactive. Some people, though, might have been very hyperactive as a kid, but grew out of the hyperactivity. So now as an adult, they're a whole lot less hyperactive than they ever were. So once again, still have ADHD, still have the inattentive symptoms and the impulsive symptoms, just not so restless. So that's myth number 2. Now, related to this once again is that ADHD is only for kids, that adults somehow grow out of it or something. I don't know what they think that all those, kids with ADHD, kind of where they go, what they become. But, Kids with ADHD, frankly, they tend to become adults with ADHD. So, that's definitely true. We know that to be the case. But if you're not a kid, you don't have to go to school, which tends to be one size fits all. As an adult, you can pick and choose your life circumstances and your job and who you live with and how you live. So, you can better match your world to what your abilities are. So ADHD becomes maybe a little bit less obvious in adulthood, but by the same token, as an adult, you have a lot more you have to keep track of. So it definitely presents its own challenges in adulthood. I think the final myth that I'll say here, or I'll cover here, is kind of this idea that folks with ADHD just have to try harder, which I'm sure, try hard. I'm sure those are the two words that make most people with ADHD absolutely livid, as if they're choosing to not try harder, as if they're choosing to make their life more difficult. Yes, sure, fine. People with ADHD have to try hard, but so does everybody else. So that's not a unique ADHD thing. We all have to try harder with certain things. But, we don't tell people with glasses that they need to try harder to see. We don't tell people who have diabetes, for example, that they need to try harder to process their, blood sugar and to keep their blood levels consistent and all of that kind of nonsense. So, simply trying harder does not change some of the basic wiring. So if the wiring is what it is, trying harder will only get you to a certain point. Beyond that, there are, treatments that are available. There's certain strategies that work much better, and that is what makes people with ADHD successful, is the combination. So hopefully that's been helpful addressing some of these myths. My hope is that ADHD Awareness Week addresses a whole lot of myths and that you can be a part of that process. So check out attitudemag.com for a bunch of ideas of some things that you can do kind of right in your local community. Thanks, and once again, this is Dr. Ari Tuckman. Bye.